My name is Serafina Monroe. For 28 years, that name felt less like an identity and more like a footnote in someone else's story. Now, living here in Portland, Oregon, it feels like my own. My days begin with the soft, pearlescent light that filters through the tall firs outside my window, the air tasting of rain and damp earth. From the small balcony of my apartment, I can see the distant, snow-dusted peak of Mount Hood, a silent, stoic guardian on the horizon. It's a quiet life, a peaceful one, built not on the foundations of family, but on the deliberate, steady work of my own two hands. It's been a year since I left Chicago, and the memory of that departure still feels like a shedding of skin. The final day in my old apartment was a study in controlled chaos. Boxes, not filled with sentimental keepsakes, but with the practical artifacts of a life I had carved out for myself, stood in stoic columns against the walls. My best friend, Maya, grunted as she heaved a box overflowing with books toward the door. Her cheeks were flushed, a stray curl of her dark hair stuck to her forehead. "Serafina, honestly, this feels like it's filled with lead bricks," she said, letting it drop with a floor-shaking thud. "Are you sure you need every single one of these?" I ran a strip of packing tape over another box, the sharp, tearing sound echoing in the cavernous emptiness of the room. "I'm donating most of them, don't worry," I said, my voice softer than the sound of the tape. "Thank you for this, Maya. I couldn't have done it alone." She collapsed onto the worn floral sofa, the only piece of furniture left. It looked adrift in the empty space, a small, floral island in a sea of beige carpet. "I still can't quite wrap my head around it. You're really leaving?" She looked at me, her brown eyes full of a familiar, gentle concern. "Are you absolutely, 100% sure you don't want to tell them?" That question. It had been a quiet refrain from the few people who knew about my move. It was always asked with the best of intentions, rooted in a conventional understanding of family that had never applied to mine. To them, not informing one's parents of a cross-country move was an act of rebellion. To me, it was simply an extension of the status quo. A small, breathy laugh escaped me. It wasn't a sound of joy, but of a kind of weary absurdity. "Maya, they don't have my current address. They haven't for 2 years. Why would I bother telling them I'm moving 3 states away when they don't even know which street I live on now?" She sighed, the sound mixing with the hum of the empty refrigerator. I know. It feels so final." "It is," I said, and the words settled in the air with a strange, liberating weight. I sank to the floor, leaning my back against the cool drywall. The emptiness of the apartment seemed to draw the story out of me, demanding to be filled with the truth I had so often kept tucked away. "It's always been about Julian," I began, my voice quiet. "My older brother. The sun around which the Monroe family orbited. From the moment he was born, he was the prodigy, the golden child. I was the echo." Maya listened, her expression softening with empathy. She'd heard the anecdotes, the fragments of my childhood, but never the whole narrative, laid out from beginning to end. "When I was 10, I said, my gaze unfocused, seeing the past superimposed over the empty room, I won the citywide young artists competition. It was a watercolor of the lily pond at the Botanical Gardens. I'd spent weeks on it, trying to get the light on the water just right. The mayor handed me the blue ribbon. My art teacher called my parents, gushing about my prodigious talent. I remembered standing in the doorway of the living room that evening, the heavy ribbon and certificate clutched in my hands, my heart thrumming with a hopeful, childish beat. I waited for them to see me. Do you know what my mother said when I finally showed her?" I asked Maya, a faint, sad smile on my lips. "Oh, that's lovely, dear. Now, can you set the table? We're having pot roast." Later that night, all they talked about was how Julian had been chosen as the starting quarterback for his junior high team. It wasn't a surprise, he was a gifted athlete. But my victory, my moment, was just a small, quiet thing to be moved past on the way to the main event. The silence in the apartment felt different now, heavier. "It just continued," I went on, the words flowing like a slow, steady stream. "High school was a masterclass in it. I was valedictorian. I was on the debate team, the mathletes. I graduated with a 4.0 GPA. My report cards were met with a cursory, 'Good job, Serafina.' But when Julian got a partial athletic scholarship to a private university out east, they threw a massive party. They took out a second mortgage on the house to cover the rest of his tuition and living expenses. My father gave a tearful speech about how proud he was, how Julian was fulfilling all their dreams. And when it was my turn for college, I let out a dry, humorless huff. They sat me down at the same dining room table for what they called a frank discussion about finances. They told me, point blank, that the college fund was depleted, that they'd invested in Julian's future, and now it was up to me to figure out my own. Maya's eyes widened. They actually said that? Invested in Julian. I nodded, word for word, as if he were a stock and I was a bond that had failed to mature. So I did. I figured it out. I earned a full academic scholarship to the University of Illinois for their design program. I was good with computers, with aesthetics, with how people interact with technology. It was my thing. I lived in the dorms, I worked 2 jobs to pay for my books and food, and I slowly, quietly, stopped going home. The visits had dwindled to holidays, then to just a Christmas Eve dinner, until one year, they simply forgot to invite me. They sent a text on Christmas morning, "Merry Christmas. Love, Mom and Dad." It was the same year my mother's Facebook was a veritable shrine to Julian's holiday visit, complete with a dozen photos of him and his new girlfriend opening presents under the tree. I realized a long time ago, I said, my voice clear and steady, that I'm not really their daughter in the way Julian is their son. I'm a biological fact they have to occasionally acknowledge. So, this is for me. I got a job offer from a green tech company in Portland called Viridian Dynamics. The work is meaningful and the pay, it's more than I ever thought I'd make. It's a clean slate. A new story. Maya stood up and wrapped me in a hug that smelled of her familiar lavender soap. It felt more like home than my childhood house ever had. I'm so sorry, Serafina, for all of it. But I am so proud of you. A real, genuine smile touched my lips. I'm proud of myself, too, I admitted, the words feeling foreign but true. I have enough saved for a down payment on a small house in a year or 2. Somewhere with a garden. That's all I've ever really wanted. We spent the rest of the evening eating Thai food directly from the cartons, sitting on the floor of my hollowed-out life. We talked about Portland, about my new job, about the future. My real family was this woman, who saw me, who listened, who celebrated my quiet victories as if they were her own. After she left, I stood in the middle of the room and took a deep breath. The air smelled of cardboard and potential. I wasn't running away from a family that had forgotten me. I was running toward a life that was waiting for me to claim it. 6 months later, I found that peace is not an absence of noise, but a quiet, internal harmony that the world cannot disrupt. My Portland apartment had become a sanctuary. I'd filled it with plants, with soft rugs, with books I'd chosen to keep. My job at Viridian Dynamics was a revelation. I was a UX/UI designer, and my ideas were not only heard but actively sought out. My boss, a sharp, kind woman named Elena, treated my contributions with respect. I was good at my job, and for the first time, my professional value felt truly recognized. I had developed a routine that felt like a gentle rhythm. Morning coffee on the balcony, watching the city wake up. A focused, creative workday. Evenings spent exploring my new city, walking through the endless green of Forest Park, discovering tiny, independent bookstores, or simply sitting by the Willamette River, watching the boats glide by. I was saving money at a pace that felt surreal. The dream of a small house with a garden was no longer a distant fantasy. It was a tangible, achievable goal I was tracking on a spreadsheet. I felt like I was finally breathing with my whole lungs. Then, one Tuesday morning, my phone buzzed with an unknown Chicago area code. A knot of old, familiar dread tightened in my stomach. Against my better judgment, I answered. Serafina. My father's voice. It was clipped, impatient, as if I'd inconvenienced him by picking up. There was no greeting, no preamble. You need to be here for dinner this Saturday. It was a command, not an invitation, delivered with the unshakable assumption of my compliance. The sheer audacity of it, after months of complete silence, was breathtaking. What dinner? I asked, my voice calm, betraying none of the turmoil inside me. It's for Julian. His fiancée, Isabel. Her parents want to meet the whole family. They're very traditional, from a good family. It's important to them that Julian comes from a stable, close-knit home. This is important for his future. His future. The phrase hung in the air, a perfect summation of my entire life. My existence was being requisitioned to serve as a prop in the theater of my brother's success. A strange sense of calm washed over me. The old fear, the old need to please, was gone. It had been replaced by a solid core of self-respect I had painstakingly built. I won't be able to make it. A beat of silence. What do you mean, you won't be able to make it? The irritation in his voice sharpened. I mean, I said, choosing my words with care, that I have other plans. I'm not coming. What could possibly be more important than your brother's future in-laws? He demanded, his voice rising. And then, something inside me didn't break, but rather settled. A profound, quiet clarity. Dad, I said, and the tone was not one of anger, but of simple, unadorned fact. Let me be very clear. I will not be flying across the country to play the part of the happy, supportive sister in a family that has never been happy or supportive of me. I will not pretend for strangers. And besides, it would be quite a long commute. Commute? What are you talking about? I moved to Portland 6 months ago, I said. The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. It was so total I could almost hear the gears in his mind grinding to a halt, trying to process a piece of data that did not fit into his worldview. You moved, he finally stammered. To Oregon? Without telling us. Why would I have told you? I asked, the question genuine. You never showed any interest in my life in Chicago. Would knowing I live in a different city have changed anything for you? Of course it would have. We're your family. What's your address? We should have your address. Do you remember my last address, Dad? The one I lived at for 3 years, just a 40-minute drive from you. He sputtered, unable to answer. That's not the point, Serafina. Actually, I said softly, I think it's the entire point. I ended the call. My hand was perfectly steady. My heart was calm. My phone immediately lit up again. Dad. I declined the call. A moment later, a text from my mother. Serafina, please call your father back. This isn't the time for games. Family is important. I didn't reply. Then, a call from Julian. I let it go to voicemail. The digital onslaught continued for the rest of the day. Texts and voicemails oscillating between wounded indignation, outright anger, and, confusingly, attempts at emotional blackmail. From Julian, Serafina, come on. It's one dinner. Isabel's parents are a big deal. Just show up, be normal, and you can fly back the next day. Don't make this difficult for me. From Mom, I don't understand why you're being so selfish. After everything we've done for you. That last one almost made me laugh. I put my phone on silent and went in my kitchen to make risotto, a slow, patient process of stirring and waiting. The entitlement was staggering. They had kept me at arm's length my entire life, and now that they required my presence for a social engagement, I was expected to materialize, smiling and compliant. My absence was not a problem because they missed me. It was a problem because it was inconvenient. The next day, my grandmother called. Nana Maeve. My father's mother, a woman who had somehow inherited all the empathy the rest of her family lacked. Her voice was a warm, familiar comfort. Hello, darling girl. I hear the Pacific Northwest is treating you well. Hi, Nana Maeve, I said, a real smile spreading across my face. It is. I love it here. I'm so glad to hear it. Now listen. Your father called me. He's in a state. I sighed. Let me guess. He wants you to talk some sense into me about Julian's dinner. He does, she said. And I told him I would call you. But I also want you to know, Serafina, that I am not going to ask you to do anything you don't want to do. I have watched the way things are in your family for a very long time. I understand. Tears pricked my eyes. To be seen, to be understood by just one person from that world, felt like a balm on an old wound. Thank you, Nana Maeve. That means more than you know. They are upset you moved without a word, she added gently. They didn't know I existed until they needed me for a photo op, I said, the words coming out without bitterness, just a quiet statement of fact. I know, dear, she said. I know. You just keep building that beautiful life for yourself. You owe them nothing. We spoke for another 20 minutes about my job, about the house I was hoping to buy, about the book she was reading. It was a normal, loving conversation, the kind I had never once had with my own parents. After we hung up, I felt anchored. I was not being cruel or unreasonable. I was being sane. Saturday came and went. I spent the day hiking in the Columbia River Gorge, the air crisp and clean, the waterfalls roaring with magnificent force. I felt a million miles away from the stuffy dining room in Chicago, where my family was performing their charade. On Sunday morning, my father called again. I answered, a kind of detached curiosity compelling me. His voice was strained. We had to tell the Vaughns you were terribly ill with the flu, he said, the lie tasting like ash even over the phone. Okay, I replied, my voice neutral, offering him nothing. The wedding is in 2 months, Serafina. You will be there. We can't use the same excuse twice. I'm not coming to the wedding either. A heavy silence. Then, his voice dropped to a low, dangerous growl, a tone that had once terrified me into submission as a child. Serafina, I am not asking you. If you do not come to this wedding, if you do not stand with your family and show these people that we are a normal, loving unit, I will write you out of my will. I will disinherit you completely. You will get nothing. A soft, quiet laugh bubbled up from my chest. It wasn't hysterical or mocking, but filled with a profound, almost sad, sense of pity for him. For his spectacular miscalculation. For the only tool he thought he had left. Dad, I said, my voice gentle. Disinherit me from what? The debt you took on for Julian's education? Your collection of golf memorabilia. I took a breath. I'm a senior designer at a very successful tech company. I make about $220,000 a year. I have over $150,000 in savings, and I'm in the process of buying my own home. I don't need your money. I never have. The silence that followed was different. It wasn't angry. It was the sound of a worldview crumbling. It was the sound of shock, of disbelief, and underneath it all, a dawning, horrified respect. Is that true? He asked, his voice small, stripped of all its bluster. If you had ever asked me a single question about my career, you would have known years ago, I said softly. The shift was instantaneous and sickening. His voice warmed, becoming slick with a sudden, cloying affection. Well, Serafina, your mother and I, we've always known how brilliant you are. We are so proud of you. Of course we are. We just want you to be a part of the family again. We miss you. I hung up the phone. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt tired. And free. An hour later, the texts from Julian started again. His tone completely changed. Serafina, Dad just told me about your job. That's incredible. I'm so proud of you. I've really missed you. It was so transparent, so pathetically opportunistic, that all I could do was shake my head. I went in my contacts and, one by one, I blocked their numbers. My father. My mother. My brother. It wasn't an act of anger. It was an act of preservation. Like pruning a plant to help it grow, I was cutting away the parts of my life that were no longer serving me, that were, in fact, poisoning the soil. My life was my garden now, and I would tend to it with care. A month later, I closed on a house. It was a small, charming 1940s cottage in the Lake Oswego suburb, with dove-gray siding and a bright red door. The garden was the selling point. It had a sprawling Japanese maple that turned a fiery crimson in the fall, climbing roses along a white picket fence, and a small patch of earth perfect for growing herbs and tomatoes. It was more than I had ever dared to dream of. The weeks that followed were a happy blur of painting walls, assembling furniture, and making the space my own. I set up a home office in the spare bedroom, with a large wooden desk overlooking the garden. Maya flew out for a long weekend to help me unpack, and we drank wine on the back porch, her laughter filling the quiet evening air. You did it, she said, her eyes shining. You actually did it. I did, I said, a sense of profound contentment settling over me. It was during that peaceful time that Nana Maeve called with an update. Hello, darling. How is the new nest? It's perfect, Nana Maeve. Absolutely perfect. I'm sitting on my own back porch. Oh, that makes my heart sing, she said. Well, I have some news from the front lines, if you're interested. I'm listening, I said, leaning back in my wicker chair. The wedding happened, she said. And from what I've heard, it was a rather frosty affair. I waited. Your parents were a mess, she continued, her voice matter of fact. They kept trying to explain your absence, but their stories kept changing. First, you had a non-refundable work trip to Asia. Then, you were recovering from a minor surgery. Isabel's parents, the Vaughns, are sharp people. They weren't buying a word of it. A quiet sense of vindication settled in my chest, not with malice, but with the simple rightness of it. That must have been awkward. Extremely, Nana Maeve confirmed. And it seems Mr. and Mrs. Vaughn did some digging of their own after your father's disastrous phone call. They asked some mutual acquaintances in Chicago about the family dynamic. They learned about how you were treated, about the college situation, everything. They were, to put it mildly, appalled. I took a slow breath, the scent of roses and damp earth filling my lungs. Wow. At the rehearsal dinner, I'm told Mrs. Vaughn pulled your mother aside and had a frank conversation. She told her that a family that discards one child to elevate another is not the kind of family she values. She questioned Julian's character for going along with it his entire life. This was more than I had ever expected. I had simply removed myself from the equation. I never imagined the equation itself would be so thoroughly scrutinized. Julian looked miserable the entire weekend, Nana Maeve added. He kept checking his phone, as if hoping for a last-minute miracle from you. Isabel looked more stressed than joyful. The foundation of their marriage, it seems, is already showing cracks. When she sent me a few photos a few days later, I saw what she meant. My parents' smiles were brittle, stretched thin over their visible anxiety. Julian stood at the altar, his eyes scanning the crowd, a shadow of disappointment on his face. And the Vaughns looked on with expressions of cool, patrician displeasure. The natural consequences of their own actions were finally, inevitably arriving. A week later, a text came through from a number I didn't recognize. It was Julian. Serafina, I know you blocked me. I got a new number. We need to talk. Isabel and I are in counseling. Her parents bring you up all the time. This is destroying my marriage. I read the message, felt a flicker of something, not pity, but a distant, clinical sadness for him, and then I deleted it. Another text came a few minutes later. I'm sorry. Okay. I know we messed up. I was a coward. I should have stood up for you. Please, just give me a chance to make it right. I put my phone down and went outside to my garden. The sun was warm on my skin. I knelt in the soft soil and began to weed around the base of a lavender plant. They were sorry now. They were sorry because their perfect world had been disturbed. Their apologies were not for the decades of neglect, but for the present-day inconvenience it was causing them. Their sorrow was a currency they were trying to spend to buy back their comfort. And I was no longer accepting it as payment. It has been 2 years since I moved to my little house in Portland. My life has settled into a rhythm of deep, quiet joy. I was promoted at work and now lead my own design team at Viridian. I've adopted a scruffy terrier mix from the local shelter named Barnaby, who is currently asleep at my feet, twitching as he dreams of chasing squirrels. My garden is thriving. Last summer, I had so many tomatoes I spent weekends making sauce and giving jars away to my neighbors. My friendship with Maya is as strong as ever. We talk on the phone every week and see each other a few times a year. And I speak to Nana Maeve every Sunday. She is my steadfast link to a past I have moved on from, but she never pressures me. She is simply my grandmother, who loves me for who I am. From her, I have learned that Julian and Isabel did, in fact, divorce just after their first anniversary. The rift caused by my family's deception was too deep to mend. My parents, she tells me, are quiet and withdrawn. They sold the big house in Chicago and moved to a condo in Florida. They still ask Nana Maeve for my address, for my phone number, which she steadfastly refuses to provide. Last month, a letter arrived. It was forwarded by my old university's alumni office, a loophole I hadn't thought to close. The handwriting on the envelope was my mother's. I held it in my hands for a long time, feeling the weight of it. There was a time when a letter like this would have sent me into a spiral of hope and dread. A time when I would have torn it open, desperate for the apology, the explanation, the love I had craved for so long. I walked into my kitchen, the letter still in my hand. Barnaby lifted his head, thumping his tail against the floor. The late afternoon sun streamed through the window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. I looked around at the life I had built. The sturdy oak table I'd bought at a flea market, the colorful mugs hanging on their hooks, the vibrant green of my houseplants. This was real. This was mine. I slid the letter, unopened, into the recycling bin. I don't know what it said. I don't need to know. Their words no longer have the power to build me up or tear me down. My worth is not determined by their approval, and my peace is not contingent on their apology. Sometimes, in the quiet moments, I wonder about the Serafina who might have been, had she been watered and tended to with the same care as her brother. But then I look at the woman I am now, independent, resilient, and content, and I realize that the neglect, as painful as it was, forced me to learn to find my own light. It compelled me to grow deep roots in the soil of my own self-worth. The greatest inheritance they ever gave me, ironically, was nothing at all. It was the empty space where their support should have been, a space that I learned, painstakingly and triumphantly, to fill all by myself. And it is a life more beautiful and more bountiful than anything they could have ever planned for me.